I like to call it the lunar lander from a technology perspective, because it's just it looks very simple, but the technology behind it is just so much investment has gone on. It's such a big project, but the number of people it can help and the way it can do it is just really revolutionary. There is that dynamic that a lot of people come into it thinking, how hard can this be? You'll just take the class and take the test and then it's done. But no, it's a lot of work. And that's the first thing I say to my students is you got to be prepared for whatever you do in class. The experience at the time was horrible, as you would imagine. It was very, very scary. I said it was sudden. It wasn't like overnight. It was over a period of a couple of months. He got sicker, and then we had a heads up from the doctor that this is not going to get better, and he passed away about a month later. So at the time it was very scary, huge loss. There's always a ton going on. It's just it hasn't stopped being an exciting area. I've been in it for 3 decades and it hasn't stopped being exciting. I'm on a few boards right now of companies developing new technology in the area. My first mission was flying blood, was a blood run, going out to these areas where they were doing a remote blood draw, and you'd go to a little regional airport and someone would turn up in a minivan with all these boxes marked human blood, load them in the back of the 172 at the time and fly them down to Boeing Field, and someone would take them off for processing. So those were fun. I never know for sure what people are going through, but you have some idea what they're going through. Is that any better than someone else who didn't go through that as a child? It's hard for me to say, of course. I think everyone can, or most people can have empathy, but yeah, I certainly feel it.
From down under to soaring over the Pacific Northwest, from big business to big impact, I am delighted to have Trevor Moody with me today. Trevor is an amazing example to me of generous giving and using the resources that he's developed over a successful career and his connections, his passions to do good for others. Trevor, welcome to the Plain Success Podcast.
Thanks, Alan. I'm really excited to be here.
Trevor, I would love to wind the clock back and talk about, you grew up in Australia. That's going to be new on the Plain Success Podcast. You're going to be our first Aussie. So I'd love to know that experience, and when did the aviation bug bite you? Was that as a kid growing up, or did that come later?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Yeah, so I was born in Australia. I was born in Sydney, so a town probably most of your listeners have heard about. It's the biggest city in Australia. But when I was pretty young, we moved up to a country town in Queensland, which is up in the north, called Toowoomba. It means the swamp in Aboriginal. I don't know how it got that name, but
great place.
Yeah, exactly. That's what. There was no swamp there, but but it was a big country town, about 60,000 people, and that's basically where I grew up and went to school, high school, and actually ended up going to university there as well. Did engineering undergrad. There was a great university there. When I was graduating from university, I did an undergraduate in biomedical and electrical engineering. I had a chance to move back to Sydney. At the time, there was a very successful cardiac pacemaker company down there called Telectronics. It was ultimately bought by a bigger US company in the future. But I joined them as a young R&D engineer and just had for me, it was just a dream experience back in Sydney, working on cutting-edge medical devices that were being implanted in people and really making a difference in people's lives. So it was very exciting technology and engineering, but also very, very satisfying to see the results of it. I had a chance about 3 years in, we bought a company in the US, and I had a chance to come over with the company for a couple of years to work in Denver, Colorado. And that was 1990. So you can do the math on that. I'm still here. I've never lived back. I've been back to Australia. Years. Exactly. Yeah. A few things happened. I met the woman who would become my wife, Laura, and ended up staying. So have had an amazing both career and just personal experience, family experience living here in the US. But yeah, that was was my time in Australia. So lived in both big cities and country towns. When I guess the terms of life experience, when I was effectively an only child. I have a half sister who I'm very close to, but she grew up. She was is 16 years older than me, and so we didn't really grow up together. And when I was about 9, my father died from colon cancer.
Oh wow!
Pretty unexpectedly. So that was a big impact and changed things quite a bit. And so that was my mother brought me up as a single mom for most of that. Was amazing. And so my father died when he was 48, but my mum ended up living to 94. So I've got maybe less good gene pool on one side, really good gene pool on the other side. So we'll see how that goes.
Trevor, I would love to, if it's okay, dig into that just a little bit. I lost my dad 4 years ago, and he was young. He was 66, but that's quite a different experience being 9 years old.
Yeah.
How do you remember that experience? Cancer is a very cruel disease to go through. I lost both of my in-laws to cancer a few years ago as well, and so very familiar with how that affects a family. But I was an adult. What was that experience like as a child?
Yeah, the experience at the time was horrible, as you would imagine. It was very, very scary. I said it was sudden. It wasn't like overnight. It was over a period of a couple of months. He got sicker, and then we had a heads up from the doctor that this is not going to get better, and he passed away about a month later. So at the time it was very scary, huge loss. And I remember, at the time I woke up one morning and we got the news that he'd passed away overnight, and I was sort of in shock. My mum asked me, did I want to go to school still? And I didn't know what else to say, so I said sure, which was a dumb decision, but went to school. And then at some point during the day, I talked to someone in class or something dumb, and the teacher, gave me a very minor sort of verbal slap on the wrist, and I just broke down and ended up going home. So it all came out at that point. But people have asked me what differences it made in my life, and it's a little bit hard to say because it's my experience, right? It's just what I know, and that's how I ended up growing up. Maybe there were some things that made me a bit more resilient. I'm sure it made me more what's the right word? Sort of aware of our mortality at a pretty early age. It gave me a realization that every day is a gift. Every day that we get is a gift, and so I think it certainly emphasized that. We had a couple of other family members, and a grandfather and an uncle that died within about a year of that. So just coincidentally, So it certainly drove that home that every day we have on the planet is a gift. So other than that, it's I've been asked that many times about what difference did it make. It's a bit hard to say because I don't have a control and a one side or another to compare. But.
Yeah, that's a significant amount of loss in a short amount of time. I'm going to take maybe a giant leap forward because now as an Angel Flight pilot, we do a lot of missions for people that are battling cancer. Yeah. How do you feel like your experience as a child with cancer helps you to connect with the people that you're flying?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously whether it's the adults or the kids that we see who are either their parents are going through it or they're going through it in some cases. There's definitely an empathy there that almost unspoken that at least have some idea what they're going through. You never know for sure what people are going through, but you have some idea what they're going through. Is that any better than someone else who didn't go through that as a child? It's hard for me to say, of course. I think everyone can, or most people can have empathy, but I certainly feel it.
Did that experience with your dad and other relatives inform your decision at all about going into a medical device or, that focus with your engineering?
It may have a little bit. I think it did. It was a combination of maybe that and always being aware of the healthcare world and seeing the technology and so forth, and being a bit of a geeky kid and probably still a geeky adult, enjoying that technology. There was that. There was also, when I was in engineering, my engineering undergraduate degree, which was mostly focused on electrical, I was in the lab one day and we'd set up an ECG, a heart monitor on an oscilloscope, and I connected the electrodes to my chest and looked at my heart on the ECG, and I remember just being blown away by what a cool application of engineering that is, as someone who loves technologies, seeing that I could do that. Life experience, and then that sort of aha at that moment really got me excited about it, and I haven't looked back. That's where I've been. Apart from my aviation stuff, that's where I've been career-wise for the rest of my life.
Now, was most of that career actually in the nuts and bolts of designing equipment, or did that transition over time into other facets of that business?
Yeah, it's always been in the medical technology industry, but it's been a mix of the nuts and bolts and more the business side, management, investing, and so forth. But I've always stayed very close to the medical technology world, so it's where I've grown up, if you like, as from a career perspective, and where I know a lot of people. I've really loved both the application of technology to help people out in a range of areas, whether it's cardiac, orthopedic, neuro, oncology, but also I've found it to be a really neat community of engineers, business people, and so forth. So I feel like I have some of my closest friends are in that industry as well.
What are some of the exciting things that are on the horizon in medical technology, Trevor, that maybe the rest of us won't be aware of, that you're getting a preview to?
Yeah, no, there's always a ton going on. It's just it hasn't stopped being an exciting area. I've been in it for 3 decades and it hasn't stopped being exciting. I'm on a few boards right now of companies developing new technology in the area. Some, I can't talk about, some I can. One particular EBR Systems, just as an example, is a leadless pacemaker for people with heart failure. So it's a little implant, literally the size of a grain of rice, that gets implanted in the left side of the heart, which is where we target for heart failure. They're in the process of going after FDA approval at the moment, so we hope to see that on the market soon. So that's one that's just, I like to call it the lunar lander from a technology perspective, because it's just it looks very simple, but the technology behind it is just so much investment has gone on. It's such a big project, but the number of people it can help and the way it can do it is just really revolutionary.
Now I'm going to demonstrate my ignorance here. How much different is that product from what's currently being used? Because I don't know.
Right. Most pacemakers today have leads. They're implanted up in, and I'm generalizing significantly here, but they are a device about the size of a large coin or a small hockey puck, something like that, typically implanted in the pectoral, in the shoulder. And they have leads, sometimes several leads going down to the heart. The leads tend to be a weak point because, this has to stay in the device in the patient for the rest of the patient's life, and the leads flex with the heart every second. So they have a high risk of breaking over time. And so a device that goes into the heart and doesn't require those leads, takes away a big failure point. So there are a couple of others that are also in development or on the market that are leadless, but for heart failure patients, this device will be the first one available on the market, hopefully in the near future.
Oh, that's incredible, Trevor. Now, I would love to know, I've lived in another country. I lived in Ecuador for a short amount of time, and there's a lot that you learn moving from one country to another. So I'd love to know, coming from Australia to the U.S., and I don't know if it was direct to Colorado. Colorado's kind of its own country within the country anyway.
Yes, it was direct to Colorado, yeah.
Okay, so I would love to know, what were there surprises in that? What were the things that you really enjoyed, and were there things that you really missed about Australia.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I mean, and I continue to enjoy the US. I've really had a good time over here. For me personally, Colorado had big mountains. I've always been into hiking and climbing, and so I got some exposure in Colorado to mountaineering, which is hard. In Australia, the highest peak is around 7,000 feet, whereas Colorado has 54 peaks over 14,000 feet. So I had a chance to do a lot of that. Made some great friends there who got me exposed to that world. So I was in my mid-20s. Just had a great experience there. Cultural surprises. Yeah, I think because we speak the same language, kind of, sorta. You can think you're speaking about the same things when you're not. So I think even to this day, my wife occasionally reminds me of things I say that people sort of understand what I get, but there's a momentary pause on what did Trevor just say? So I've tried over my time in the US to not just be a novelty and speak like Americans, but I know occasionally I come up with an Australianism that confuses people.
Was there a product or a deal during your career that really stands out as kind of a highlight, something that you're really proud of or was just exciting to be involved in?
Yeah. It's a little bit like your kids, right? It's hard to pick out just one because there was one somewhat recently that actually sort of panned out during the pandemic. We had made an investment in a company called Simplify Medical that was a novel cervical disc replacement for the spine, so going from the heart to the spine.
Wow.
So really great group of people down in the Bay Area had developed basically a ceramic, so sort of a ceramic device. The current devices had all been basically metal. And so developed this ceramic device that would allow MRI imaging, which is tough to do with metal in there. And it had some other pretty significant benefits. We ran a couple of clinical studies, and right as we got FDA approval, we were acquired by a US public spine company. Had a very nice outcome. Both, I think it was good for the investors. It was good for the company because they got in to be part of a bigger company and go on commercialize the device, and good for patients because this company could do a better job than Little Simplify could in terms of getting it out to lots of doctors and lots of patients. So that was one that was somewhat recent and just went very smoothly. The team did an outstanding job of just delivering on schedule and on budget, and just and the ultimate results from the clinical study were some of the best we've ever seen in the spine market. So it led to a lot of corporate interest and a pretty quick acquisition there. So that was a nice one.
So Trevor, when did flying enter into the equation for you?
Yeah, you asked me about that earlier on. I didn't answer you. I've really been an aviation geek as long as I can remember, but I've only been a pilot sort of later in my life. I had a couple of family members early on who was sort of heroes of mine. I have an aunt who both have passed away now, but my aunt who made it to 103 in her early days was a founding member of the Canberra Aero Club. This was before World War II, if you can believe that.
Oh, wow.
So Joan, my Aunt Joan, was in the 1930s, helped set up this flying club in Canberra is the capital of Australia, like Washington, D.C. It's halfway between Sydney and Melbourne. So basically a big country town that became the capital city. So Joan was amazing and did a lot of flying. And then I had an uncle, Brian, who was a fighter pilot in World War II in the Royal Australian Air Force, and just flew an amazing range of aircraft. He's passed away now, but had a chance to sit down with him and go through his logbooks from that time. And I don't have the numbers perfectly, but he did something like 800 hours or something, which is a lot, but not something you would see for an airline pilot or something these days. So, but in that time, he flew like 15 to 20 different types of planes in that. And in anger, right, he was flying them against Messerschmitts, flying them, looking for Japanese submarines off the coast of Australia, things like, he was doing all sorts of things. So just really amazing flying experience there. So, yeah, so those two, I grew up knowing them. They were, both aunt and uncle, and so heard a lot of stories from them. So between that and some friends who got their pilot's license fairly young and got to fly with them, it was always on my mind, but, always had the excuse of I'm too busy or don't have enough money or whatever. When I was at a previous job in Seattle, a partner of mine came into my office one day and said, "Hey, you're interested in flying. We should buy a little," his son was learning to fly. "We should buy a little Cessna or something." I'm like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. I've thought about it, but yeah. And so he went off and then came back about a month later and said, "Have you thought any more about that plane?" And so ended up he wore me down and we bought as I started my PPL, bought a 1977 Cessna 172N, which I ended up owning for a long time. I only sold it a couple of years ago. It was an outstanding plane. So
that was my first plane, was a P model. So
excellent. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. All good. Yeah. So anyway, so that was I was always into planes. Actually, for a long time before I got my PPL, I did a lot of RC flying and really enjoyed that. And still, I don't have any time to do that, but enjoyed it. But then, stepped up to the full scale, as we say.
So tell me about learning how to fly. Was it instant love? I mean, for me, it definitely was. I can remember that first Discovery flight and just the sensation of being in the air. And then I was actually very surprised at the amount of education that you had to get in order to be able to fly. I had erroneously assumed that it was just like driving a car. Maybe there's a little booklet to read and you take a test and they let you go do your thing. And I was really surprised at the amount of knowledge that I had to acquire in avionics and mechanics and different health issues and weather and just all of the different facets that go into aviation. So did that come as a surprise to you, or you were probably more educated than I was, Trevor? So
I don't know. I think it was. I mean, it took me about a year. I had kids and busy job and so forth, so it took me about a year. But to your point, I loved it from the first flight. I remember just even my instructor describing how the trim works. I still remember that because I hadn't really thought about that. I had done a fair bit of research, but I'd never really thought about the trim, and just that that trim wheel in the 172, just seeing how that works and how you wouldn't think it's important, but it turns out it is important. And learning that, was just wonderful. So it's a lot of work, both the flying and learning cross-country stuff, learning how to navigate with a VOR. This was all pre-GPS, of course. All the ground school and the FAA written test, which is always a challenge. But I loved every part of it and went on to do my instrument, my commercial, multi-engine commercial. I don't know if I told you, but last year I got my advanced ground instructor certificate. So I'm actually teaching private pilot ground at Galvin, one of the flight schools here in Seattle. I've done a few classes now, just finishing up one now, and really enjoying it. But there is that dynamic that a lot of people come into it thinking, how hard can this be? You'll just take the class and take the test and then it's done. But no, it's a lot of work. And that's the first thing I say to my students is you got to be prepared for whatever you do in class. There's going to be 2 to 3 times the amount of study outside to get through this, because you're drinking from a fire hose in one of these classes.
Was there anything that in that initial part of learning how to fly that scared you?
Probably just one. I had one. We're in the confessional here, so I had before. I had one, but I was solo. Still didn't have my license, but one solo. I remember one landing, and it was just I went off the runway. No.
Oh wow.
Yeah, extremely minor damage, but went off into the grass, and I just wasn't all over the rudder pedals and so forth, and very embarrassing. Like, I'm not a good pilot, all that kind of stuff. But plane was fine. I was fine. But it was a good reminder. I've unfortunately never had anything like that since. So that was a good thing to get out of the system and learn that, no, this is serious and you need to be very on everything. I don't know that I wasn't, but maybe I wasn't enough at that moment, or I was distracted or something. Mm-hmm. So probably that was the only one that came up. But that was, it was embarrassing at the time, but in retrospect, probably a good thing to have happen.
I think it's interesting how those experiences open your eyes pretty quickly. As you were sharing that, I was remembering, when I was cleared finally to go solo away from the airport, my first flight where you get to go 25 miles or whatever it is away, and you just think you've got all the freedom in the world. And, I live in Phoenix. It's a busy airspace. And so I took off, and I knew how far away 25 miles was, so I was staying as far away from as possible because I had the freedom to do that.
Yeah.
And then I need to transition over another airport's airspace, so I'm busily trying to find radio frequencies and everything that I need to do. And in retrospect, I probably wasn't in any danger, but I looked up, and it seemed like the mountain range south of me here was right in my face, and I didn't know how it got there. I had been so busy trying to find whatever that I felt like I had just about flown myself into the side of this mountain. In retrospect, I probably wasn't anywhere close and had plenty of time to avoid and everything else, but similarly, it was just a wake-up call. It's like, wow, things can happen really fast, and it doesn't take a lot of distraction to fly into a situation that could be dangerous for you or for someone else.
Yeah, it's a serious, and there are risks. There are ways to mitigate the risk, but you need to know how to do that.
Well, then you accelerated pretty quickly. You advanced from the Cessna into a much faster, complicated airplane into a Mooney. What did you enjoy about that transition? Because I did something similar. I went from a 172 into a Bonanza.
Yeah.
And so very similar high-performance aircraft, complicated. And so what did you learn from that experience, or how did that feel making that transition?
No, I loved it. I did fly. I was working on my commercial rating, and at that time you needed to fly a complex plane during getting your commercial rating. So I'd had some experience with it, but I was really eager to get the better performance and have more speed than you get in a 172. Yeah, exactly. Pilots always want to go faster. So that was a given. But also just for my personal advancement, learning to be a pilot in a more complex, faster plane felt like a natural sort of step in the journey, like like you did, and many pilots go through that. So I really enjoyed it. The Moonies are, in retrospect, actually pretty easy planes to fly once you've got them down. They have a reputation for being tricky to land, but I found as long as you nail the approach speed, I found it actually easier to get good landings than the 172, surprisingly. But you had to learn what to do. You had to nail the airspeed, and as long as you did that, it was an easy plane to land. You had to learn airspeed management. I'm sure with the Bonanza, the same. Slowing it down could be a challenge, and I did have speed brakes, so those were nice, but I tried to fly without the speed brakes and just use them sort of a last-ditch thing if I needed to slow down. So, I love the Mooney. It was a little challenging from an Angel flight perspective, because getting some passengers in and out of that, as you can imagine, was a little challenging. Although once you got inside, it wasn't too bad, but getting in and out was a bit of a challenge. So after a few years, started looking at other options. But no, I have, no regrets. I really enjoyed my time with the Mooney.
As you're talking about learning how to control the speed, I'm reliving the first few months of having the Bonanza, where you'd come over a mountain range or something in Arizona, and the airport's right there, and I was still figuring out how to slow this thing down. And so there were several times on downwind where there was a 360 turn at the other end, just to be able to bleed off some airspeed, because I didn't know how to slow down otherwise. No, it is the key learning that we all go through on those complex, slippery planes. So. When did you discover Angel Flight West, and tell me about your experience joining and flying, maybe first mission or maybe memorable missions that you've had?
About a bit over 10 years ago, I actually went to an event in Seattle, actually close to where I live. A fellow who at the time was on the board of Angel Flight West header, sort of gathering to welcome new pilots. Josh Olson, who we know, who's still the executive director, he was up here for the event. And so I didn't even know about know about it, but a pilot friend mentioned it, and he and I went along to this event. And when I went to it, it was just like, oh my gosh, this is for me, right? This is perfect. It's flying, it's healthcare, it's giving back. This is wonderful. So I was hooked at that moment. So I think I did have the minimum number of hours. PIC is 250, and I had the number of hours at that point. So I pretty much signed up then and there and started flying from there. So I was an easy one for them to land. So yeah.
Do you remember your first mission, or maybe a mission that's been really memorable or touching for you?
Yeah, boy, there's once again, there's been a lot, up to a little north of 130 now. So which it's amazing to hear that number, although it seems like a lot, although then I see some of our other colleagues who've done 500 or 600 or 700.
1,000,
so, yeah, exactly. So, but no, my first mission was flying blood, was a blood run, going out to these areas where they were doing a remote blood draw, and you'd go to a little regional airport and someone would turn up in a minivan with all these boxes marked human blood. You'd load them into the back of the 172 at the time and fly them down to Boeing Field, and someone would take them off for processing. So those were fun. There's fewer of those going on now because business models change for some of the blood organizations. But in terms of people, yeah, look, it's hard to pin down particular ones. I've one fellow early on who was a retired veteran in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, who I flew a few times, and he had colon cancer, and had flown him into Seattle for chemo. That's a common route for us up here in the Pacific Northwest, is flying from either Coeur d'Alene or Spokane into Seattle. So flew him a few times, and just, we became pretty good friends. So didn't stay in close touch, but occasionally I heard from him or something. But a few months later, he sent me a letter and told me that basically he was cancer free now. Oh, wow. And just said, look, given where I'm at, geographically where he lived, he didn't live in Coeur d'Alene proper. He was up in the hills in the middle of nowhere outside of Coeur d'Alene. And he said, look, if I hadn't had access to Angel Flight West, I just wouldn't have had the energy to go to treatment. I just would have let it take me because there wasn't any other option. But he was just, thank you, not just to me, but to all the pilots who flew him and to Angel Flight West. And he was now in remission and could get on with his life. So that was very touching, but also just reminded me of, for us, it's flying someone and it's what we do, but it was everything to him. And I think it is to many of the patients we fly, or I fly.
So both in your flying and in your professional career as an engineer, I think you've had to look at what is the problem, what are the possible solutions, what are the outcomes. I would love to know, from a board of directors position with Angel Flight West, what are the challenges that you see, what are the opportunities, and what are the technologies, or what are the changes that need to be made in order for us to realize, a higher impact?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's something we talk about at the board all the time. I mean, the opportunities are probably the easy one, and it's just there, and it's easy and it's not. So in a hand-waving response, we know that the opportunity, if you want to call it that, is really a challenge for the healthcare system, but the opportunity is immense in terms of the number of people who are living remotely and maybe have access to care but don't have any practical way to get transport, or can't afford it, or it's just, how am I going to do that every week, that kind of thing. I mean, one thing we see again and again is people who you wouldn't necessarily consider to be financially challenged. They might have a good job and so forth, but when you start racking up travel every week across the state that's uncompensated, that can devastate a family's finances. So the opportunity across the country in terms of the number of people who can't access care is very significant. It's tough to put numbers on it. We are actually doing some work. We had a researcher at the University of Washington just recently doing some work on exactly that, to scope out how big the opportunity is. But it's a big opportunity. We occasionally take stabs at what percentage of the opportunity we're serving today, and it's unfortunately it's a small number. So, challenges that we always face are on the provider side, on the healthcare community side, is getting word out about Angel Flight West. So, we're always looking at ways to get word out. There tends to be, a lot of people rely on their social workers a lot of patients rely on their social workers to help them navigate transportation, and getting the word out amongst the social worker community is important for us. There tends to be a lot of turnover. People move around a lot in that community. So it's a non-stop job, right? You can't just go to a hospital and tell them about it and then your job's done. You have to keep telling them and keep telling them. And so we've over the years, we've been increasing the number of outreach people we have, both as staff and volunteers. And then on the pilot side, it's never enough pilots. So any pilots watching this, can't say enough good things about it. But if this at all appeals to you, please sign up. Please sign missions. Please fly missions, because that is always, I suspect, going to be a rate limiting path for us. We every month we always have missions that don't get filled because we don't have enough pilots. So yeah, getting pilots signed up. There are enough pilots. There just aren't enough pilots signed up in Angel Flight West. We have hundreds of thousands of pilots in the US. So that part's not the problem. It's just getting them signed up and getting them flying and so forth. And obviously, it is a volunteer organization. So, it takes the pilots donate their time and the planes expenses and so forth. And I recognize that's non-trivial for the pilots to do as well. So those are...
it's a smaller subset of the pilot community, right? Because you have the professional pilots that are flying, for the major airlines or cargo or whatever they're doing. And, at least in conversations that I've had with those pilots, the general aviation community really isn't on their mind hardly at all, or for very few of them. They are focused on doing their job, and that's what it is. And then you have another subset of pilots, which are, the student pilots that are working their way up and either aren't qualified or financially not able to give in the way that we have to as Angel Flight pilots. And then, to shrink that further, you've got to have regular access to an airplane, which, so you take those hundreds of thousands of pilots, and I don't know what margin you shrink that by, but it becomes a fairly small target audience.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But, it's still, like you, I know, thank you for your signing up to be the Arizona wing leader. That's huge and great. We're always doing outreach and always talking to pilots, and we have a couple of conferences where we have a booth up here in the Seattle area. So you spend a weekend talking to pilots, and I think we have a really terrific brand. Most pilots know about us, but the conversation I have all the time is, or the feedback I hear all the time is, oh yeah, I know about Angel Flight West. I've been meaning to sign up. And so I do think there's still a significant part of that pool, which I agree with you on how it's cut down, but that pool is still pretty big, and we've still got a long way to go in terms of getting all those pilots flying. So,
do you think there are steps forward that Angel Flight West can make, and and I don't know, and this is why I'm asking, in the ability to follow up or stay in contact with people that you meet at a booth or something else, to make sure we're grabbing an email address or a phone number, and then, for lack of a better term, constantly reminding them, about the opportunity.
Yeah, I think we can always do better on that. I think we've made great strides. There have been a couple of fairly big grants that have come into the organization that have allowed us to hire like a volunteer services team now, small team, but a team that focuses on things you're describing. So both the outreach, but also when they call, moving them through that sign up and education and training process more efficiently than we probably have in the past. And when they hit a roadblock along the way, being a resource for them to get that roadblock out of the way. So I do think we're doing a better job on that than we have in the past. It's a bit because of resources. We've had more resources to have people to focus on that. In the past, it's mostly been focused on scheduling missions. The staff has been scheduled on that. Now, with some extra resources, we have been able to focus on getting volunteers in, just doing out, even once someone is in, reminding them that, hey, we need you to fly missions, and having wing fly-ins. I think we've always done that, but I think we're doing a better job of having more community events in the wings. And yeah, so range of things, there's always more we can do. So
Trevor, I'm hosting an event this week to help, raise awareness and also advance Angel Flight West in Arizona. And as I was thinking on how I wanted to talk about the challenges that we face, what came to mind is that we have 3 F words that we're trying to overcome. We have our flyers, which is our pilots, recruiting more pilots. We have our friends, or the passengers, and that's primarily connecting with healthcare providers or other philanthropic organizations that already have connections. And then also funding. How do you see the opportunity there? Just as I've thought about it, I think of your experience in healthcare. There are large corporations that have philanthropic arms that I think we would be a good fit for. How do we do a better job of increasing that funding so that we can expand our outreach and our mission? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, getting the name. We have had some success with some large organizations where there's an overlap between healthcare and aviation. Sometimes there have been, a big family foundation where the founder or the patriarch or whatever has a pilot's license, so is excited about aviation, and then being able to talk something about aviation and healthcare is the sweet spot. And they were like, oh my gosh, this ain't just like my initial reaction. Their initial reaction was, we were made to donate money to Angel Flight. So we've definitely had some of those, and those have become $1 million level grants for us. But doing more, those tend to be hard organizations they don't hang a shingle out, right? You have to know them, you have to get an introduction. These are not, public. They're not public typically about everything they're doing. So I think telling our story, telling the story about the size of the opportunity that can be tapped here. I think a lot of these organizations want to have a big impact, rightly so, with the generous, wealth that the precious wealth that they're donating. So being able to tell a story effectively about how big the opportunity is and how we can tap into some of that, I think is often powerful for those, that audience. I think we can do a better job on telling that story, and we are working on how we can tell that story more accurately or more crisply.
Yeah, certainly not pointing a finger and saying you're not doing a good job, just for clarity's sake.
There's always, I understand. No, I'm not taking it though. No, there's always more. There's always more. In the time I've been involved, I've been really impressed at how it's advanced. It's the staff, it's just, they're the ones that actually do the work and have done an amazing job. But there's always more. So.
Yeah, they do a fantastic job both in communicating with the families that we're serving and also with the pilots. We're running a small airline, right, where we're 5,000 flights a year. I don't know the exact number, but
no, it's about that.
Yeah, that's not there's a lot of small air carriers that don't do 5,000 flights a year.
Right. No, that's one of the things I lead with when I'm describing Angel Flight West to someone is the 5,000 flights a year, because it does get people's attention that this is not just a little group of pilots in a hangar somewhere talking about doing a flight next weekend. There are 100 flights a week, potential in some weeks. So it's a significant organization.
Yeah, that's incredible. Trevor, how did your family feel about you starting to fly? Was there trepidation on the part of your wife or your kids?
Yeah, I don't think so. Interestingly, my wife, who's been very supportive, actually, when we first talked about getting a plane, she took some lessons. And my oldest daughter, took some lessons at one point, didn't end up wanting to get a license, but took some lessons. My kids have flown with me a lot. So my oldest daughter, when she was 14, she and I flew out to Oshkosh in the 172 from Seattle. And
wow.
That's 2 days of bouncing along in turbulence over Montana.
That's dedication.
And so forth. It's dedication. She still says to this day she had a blast. So so I've done a lot of sort of mostly short trips like that, but had a lot of fun. We don't have like a family destination somewhere. Like some people want to buy a plane because they've got a second house some distance away. We don't have that. So it's more just sort of fun stuff with the kids, but they've all flown with me quite a bit and had a lot of fun.
Trevor, I know that recently you've moved into a phase of life that I envy, whether it's full retirement or semi-retirement, but where you have, more time to dedicate to yourself. How are you finding meaning and purpose, joy and happiness in this new phase of life? There's a part of that I look forward to. I'm like, I can't wait. And there's other parts that like, okay, well, what would I do with the time that I had? Other than, I would fly a lot more. Yeah. But that's an easy one.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I there's no right answer and everyone's different for sure. I think like yourself, I've always been in a mode of life where I'm busy and it's hard to imagine not being busy. And I think I've got a little bit more choice about where I'm busy now, which is great. I still love the medical device industry, and so I'm still involved on a number of boards, as I described, and would like to continue doing that for a long time. I really, really enjoy that. So still doing that, but not doing that all the time. So having some flexibility on, call it 50%, I don't know, some amount of time. Like you say, I've been flying more Angel Flight West missions. I've had more time to contribute to the board, on the board of Angel Flight West, so had more time to work on board projects and so forth. Fly more missions. I've been working on my flight instructor rating, so I have my ground instructor rating. I'm working on my flight instructor rating, and that's a lot of work. So that's kept me busy. So a number of things. I've always enjoyed travel, so can do that with a little less guilt than maybe I did before when I was in a full-time job and with a family and so forth. So it's working out the right balance is always a challenge, but I'm very grateful for being able to have that flexibility.
So, Trevor, at the end of each podcast, I like to remember what my dad said growing up. In fact, he said it so often that this is what's on his headstone was remember the little things. Are there little things that you remember your dad teaching you that have been impactful in your life that you've tried to remember and apply?
Yeah, I obviously I was pretty young, but have very all positive experiences of him. I think the things that I remember, maybe not so much words, but he was definitely a technology tinkerer, like I am, and he at a house we had. Which had a basement but totally unfinished, and he disappeared for a while. Didn't totally disappear, but he was busy in the basement for a long time and had completely concreted the whole basement, had put in a movie theater, like as big a movie theater, and he was into model trains, and had built around the side, had built this very elaborate model train line, that went for all the way around the house. So things like that. I think quite a bit of that has influenced me, and I still love the technology. I love particularly it's been in different areas, but the same sort of idea. So I think more than any particular words, I think just watching him get enjoyment from that kind of stuff had a big influence on me.
So with the extra time that you've purchased some shovels and you're digging out the basement of your house. Is that what we're...
doing some other projects, but of the same sort of scale. Yeah, that was pretty impressive.
Wonderful. If there were some little things that you'd love for your kids to hear, what are some things that you would like for them to remember about you? Yeah,
I think the influence my dad had, and but also the adversity early on of him dying so young, and that you can keep. We all go through that. I mean, that was unique, and not everyone has their father die when they're 9 years old, but we all suffer major adversity in our lives. Everyone does, And we don't know what people are going through when we meet them. So just being aware of that, both people you meet and having empathy, but also yourself when you go through them, that it can be bad, keep going. We can get through these challenges. I think just too, I should have said too, that in the free time I have now, the other thing that has been wonderful is I can get up in the morning and make my kids breakfast. My wife still works full time, so make my kids breakfast for school, and I'm sure they don't appreciate just how much I enjoy that, actually. Even though sometimes I'm complaining about it, but I actually really enjoy it. And we've still got 2 kids in high school, and I'm sure I will miss that when they're gone. So the fact that we've got 4 healthy, lovely kids who are around and all very close in our lives is just absolutely wonderful. So that's absolutely huge joy in my life.
Wonderful. Trevor, thank you for the contribution you've made in the medical device world and the impact that you're making for Angel Flight West right now, and probably more importantly in your family. I think those moments of making breakfast are a big deal. What a great opportunity to be able to enjoy that before they move on to the next phase of their life. Maybe they'll be headed back to Australia. You came here, maybe they'll head back there.
You never know. They've threatened to do that, so you never know. They might. Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Alan. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thanks. Bye-bye.